welcome to Gamecock Pod Live.
For the next 3 to 4 years, I'll be committed to the University of Gamecock.
This is Rodgers again to the 25, 20, 15, 10. Rodgers scores!
Jackie Bradley Jr. delivered for the Gamecocks.
Lost it up, looking for Kelly. Touchdown! Can you believe it?
And South Carolina is sending shockwaves through the SEC.
Frederick plays it in at the buzzer. That's a win! Unbelievable! I don't believe it!
And now, live from Studio 54 of the Gamecock Pod Studios, here's the Cockfather himself, Keith Alsep.
All right, everybody, welcome into Gamecock Pod Live. I got caught there, a little rundown. Sorry about that. Today is Wednesday, February the 12th. All you guys out there, I hope you have already taken care of your ladies. And ladies, I hope you've taken care of your men for Valentine's Day. Welcome in. We have got a powerhouse lineup on tap today. This is episode number 1687. I can't believe it. 1700 is on the way. In just a few minutes, my man Craig and everybody else. Special shout out to Sarasota, Florida, and Riverview this morning as well. We will be joined by the man himself, Michael W. Bratton, the host of That SEC podcast. Then Alex Jones from the Big Spur will join us. You know the line from Wall Street, money never sleeps. Well, recruiting never sleeps. South Carolina is very busy lining up official visits for the 2026 season. And not only that, unofficial visits for spring practice, which gets underway in about 5 weeks from today on March the 19th. All right, let's jump right into our Nana's Porch news, notes, and highlights. We'll give you a few of these until Michael jumps on, and then we'll wrap them up later. All right, so number one, happy birthday to Hale McGranahan's wife. Today is her birthday, so happy birthday, Mrs. McGranahan. Gamecock baseball and the Paul Maneri era set to get underway Friday at 4 p.m. at Founders Park. 4 p.m. first pitch. Then on Saturday the 15th, the field will formally be named Ray Tanner Field. They've already got it written and stamped out there behind home plate. It looks sharp. Legendary Hall of Fame coach, won back-to-back national championships, took South Carolina to Omaha, I believe 6 times, was runner-up twice. And so very deserving for him. Paul Maneri has announced his weekend rotation. It does not include Eli Jersenbeck. If you were watching or listening last Wednesday, you heard John Whittle say, you know, a couple months ago that seemed like a done deal, but that Jersenbeck had just not pitched well As of late, he is not in the starting rotation, at least for this weekend series against Sacred Heart. Friday, it will be right-handed pitcher Dylan Eskew, a 6-foot senior from Tampa, Florida, and then Maneri will throw a pair of lefties out. Saturday, Matthew Becker, 6'3", 215 senior from Chapin, and then on Sunday, sophomore Jake McCoy, 6'1", 185 from Fort Mill. He will take the bump in the series finale. Got to give a shout out to Sterling Sharp, who finally was elected to the Pro Football Hall of Fame, becoming the first former Gamecock player to be selected for the Pro Football Hall of Fame as a player. A great honor. Obviously, his career was cut short. A legendary Green Bay Packer. And it's kind of weird. You know, Brett Favre's career was basically made by Gamecock wide receivers. First, he had Sterling Sharp. Then he had Robert Brooks. Then when he went to Minnesota, he had Sidney Rice. And so that's something not even Heisman Trophy winner George Rogers, who unfortunately played for Bum Phillips in New Orleans, and George, I think, played 6 or 7 years, but his body probably took the beating of a 15 to 18-year veteran because he carried the ball about every damn play. So it's very unfortunate. He is a member of the College Football Hall of Fame, though. Men's basketball tonight takes on number 19 and number 23 Ole Miss at 7 p.m. That is on the SEC Network. They'll be looking for still their first SEC win of the season. They are 0-10. And think about this, Jordan Butler, who is a sophomore and was at Missouri last year. Missouri went 0-18 last year, lost in the first round of the SEC tournament. Jordan Butler, after tonight, could be 0-30 in the SEC. That is a dubious distinction. Shout out to Ashley Chastain Woodard in softball for getting off to a 5-0 start. Back-to-back walk-off wins against Fat Cox Wahoos to start the season, and then 3 shutout wins over East Carolina. She announced that today she is adding former Gamecock pitcher Carson Hanna as the program's director of operations. She was a pitcher for the Gamecocks from 2020 to 2023. She is a double summa cum laude graduate from the University of South Carolina, earning her Bachelor of Arts in Public Relations from the Journalism School in Mass Communications with a cognate in Psychology, Sociology, and Religious Studies. In August of 24, she earned a Master's of Science from the College of Education in Coaching Education. She had 29 career games, started 82 appearances, 17 wins, and 3 saves, and she ranks second all-time in program history and relief performances. It's always good to add a Gamecock to your staff. Gamecock women's basketball will take on Florida tomorrow night. They'll be looking to bounce back and start a new SEC regular season win streak as their 57-game win streak. They had not lost a regular season game since the opening game in January of 2021 at Missouri. Addison and I were there. We had great seats. Shout out to my dude at UT for that. Addison got to take a picture with Madison Booker. We got to meet Adele Tack and Joyce Edwards after the game, and I got to hang out with my dude Bakari Sellers, who, when I coached him, he was all knees and elbows and a squeaky-voiced 12-year-old ninth grader. Now he's a 6'8", very successful attorney and analyst on CNN. Always good to catch up with him. Look, this game was out there for the taking for the Gamecocks. Okay. But you can't miss 14 of 26 layups. And in the first half, South Carolina was just 7 for 14 from the free throw line. And if you had told me Rory Harmon is going to go 1 for 9 from the field with no threes, and Madison Booker's going to be 7 for 22 and not make any threes, I would have said, hey, Gamecocks are going to win that game, but they didn't because they just missed too many shots. I won't even get into the horrific officiating, earmuffs for all the kids right now. This week's winners of the Dick of the Week is official Brian Hall and Kevin Peftel, who absolutely, well, I couldn't tell where Vic Schaefer ended and they began. They had their head so far up his hind parts, but still, when you miss 14 layups and you miss 8 free throws and you lose by 4, you got nobody to blame but yourself. All right. Let's bring in my favorite SEC podcaster and maybe my favorite podcaster in general, because unlike a lot of folks, he just doesn't sugarcoat it. He tells it just like it is. Mike, belated Happy New Year. Hopefully you got everything ready for Valentine's Day. Probably try to keep the kids away from cousin Shane. But
yeah.
How are you, my friend?
Excuse me. Hey, Keith, I'm doing horribly. I'm sick as a dog, but that's the beautiful thing of doing what I do. Doesn't matter how sick you are, you can still get your ass up and do it. So that's what I'm doing. Thanks for having me. Long time no see, my friend. How are you?
I'm probably doing better than I deserve. So let's jump right into it. This is the burning question everybody wants to know. As good as the SEC is and has been in football, is the SEC now a basketball league?
Well, I mean, you certainly could make a strong case for it being a basketball league, but the way I hear it, Keith, I think it's even better in baseball. So I think it's anything but a football league right now. And but yeah, I mean, as sad as that is for me to admit, I think basketball certainly. This may be. I don't follow college basketball that closely, but I literally have been forced to watch it this year because it's so dang good. All these teams, even I know your audience well aware South Carolina can't seem to win in the conference, but normally that's because they're awful. A team that can't win. It's more. There's so many good teams, and they're coming so close. And before the tournament, I think they were like 14-2 before conference play started, something like that. So, Yeah, this has just been an unbelievable year in basketball, and I think you have to say it's better in basketball right now.
So, Mike, when I was growing up, and I know I'm older than you, my dad, he worked with a big Alabama guy and one of the most significant people in my life as a huge Alabama fan. They used to tell me there's only two sports in Alabama, football and spring football, right?
Yeah.
Like I know you probably heard that growing up. But for the first time ever this Saturday, there has never been in the history of the Southeastern Conference a regular season matchup of the number 1 ranked team in the country versus the number 2 ranked team in the country. And it's number 1 Auburn and number 2 Alabama, both in the Yellowhammer State. And man, Nate Oates and Bruce Pearl, we know that the money is flowing, NIL, and they have, I don't know, maybe they spend as much as Ohio State on their football roster.
Yeah, they may very well, and it's paying off for them, isn't it? So,
No doubt.
My whole life, I can't really remember Auburn or Alabama being too relevant. I do remember there was one year Auburn, again, this is going way back, but they had this guy, I think his name was Chris Porter, was doing like wild dunks. That was the best Auburn had ever gotten, and I don't even think they got that far. But yeah, it's remarkable. I think those are probably the 2 best coaches in the SEC right now, Nate Oates and Bruce Pearl.
Yeah, I mean, you know, we always talk about Eli Drinkwitz having the most punchable face of any football coach in the SEC, but Florida's basketball coach who somehow escaped suspension. Well, I don't know.
He started winning. That's how.
he's winning. That's right. That's all it takes is just win, baby. But
now if he starts losing, new allegations probably will be not far behind. You know what?
That's right. I mean, you know, you look at Mark Pope in Kentucky, most of Calipari's roster either went to the NBA or transferred to Arkansas with him. They're looking awfully good. My dude, Rick Barnes, on Rocky Top. I thought, you know, and we'll get to football here, but I love Rick Barnes. That's been my guy since I was a high school coach in South Carolina, and he was at Clemson, even though I grew up a Gamecock. He had the balls and the honesty to say what nobody else was willing to say is, hey, we're paying this guy a lot of money, and we draw up a play for him to take this shot, and he doesn't take the shot. I'm sitting his behind on the bench. Because he's making too much money not to take that shot.
Yeah, I love it. I love the honesty, and I think you know, he's probably the best coach in Tennessee history now, which is pretty wild to say. I don't know Texas basketball history, but he's probably their best coach too, based on what he did down there. So, you know, the knock on him will probably always be, you know, obviously the tournament failures, but. Again, that's another program. When I was growing up, I don't even remember Tennessee making the tournament. I know they've done it before Bruce Pearl, or Bruce Pearl started that. But under Rick Barnes, they're in it every year, and they're contending for the SEC championship every year. I think he's a heck of a coach. I hope he stays forever up there at Tennessee.
I love Rick Barnes, Hickory, North Carolina, Lenore Ryan guy. At the Final Four in Indianapolis, we had a very fascinating conversation about cornbread. And there was a whole bunch of coaches gathered around. We were at lunch together. I was with Ken McDonald, one of his former assistants, and he's just as down to earth as it gets. And you know, I'm not a big Orange fan, but it's really hard to pull against Kim Caldwell, and I'll never be able to pull against Rick Barnes except against the Gamecocks. All right, so let's talk football, and let's talk about your favorite 2 coaches in the SEC, Kalen DeBoer and Brian Kelly. I mean, Brian Kelly, that South Carolina game early, it appeared the SEC refs thought they were protecting the right team because LSU was going to be in the college football playoff. Well, we know that didn't happen.
Right.
Kalen DeBoer, I thought, had a kind of a rough year. Milroe, it was uneven. He did just hire back Ryan Grubb, his former offensive coordinator, a guy Nick Saban tried to hire. But I think, Alabama, I think it's going to take a couple of years for him. And look, I'm super high on him as a coach, probably more so than you are, just because of his track record and what he's done. But it just seemed like they were swimming upstream all year this past year.
Yeah, well, good luck to him because he's already lost the fan base. And some of the games they got next year at Georgia, that's going to be difficult. Hell, I think at Florida State, that's the opener at Florida State. That's a no-win situation because Alabama's going to be favored. Alabama's going to be expected. I mean, even if let's say it's a 7-point win, I think those fans will be pissed. So how can we just beat this team by 7 points? They got Tennessee at home. They got at South Carolina. They got at Missouri, at Auburn. I mean, and LSU's coming to town. So that schedule is just full of landmines. Now they should be really good. To your point, I mean, they may have one of the better defenses, if not the best defense, with everybody they got coming back on that side of the ball. But offense is going to remain a question. Every time Kalen DeBoer did something right, he did something horribly wrong last year. So, yeah, I mean, I don't know that he sees year three at Alabama. I really don't at this point in time.
Well, I will remind you, Nick Saban did go 6-6 his first year in Alabama.
Yeah, but that was completely different because he wasn't taking over the greatest dynasty of all time. You know what I mean? And I know there were defections, but they are, Keith. There's not a ton of like preseason top 10 or 25. I know there's a couple, but look at the preseason top 25 lists that are out now. How many of them have Alabama in the top 3? None of them. And as long as Nick Saban was there nearly 20 years, aside from that first 2 years, I mean, they were either your preseason number 1 or your preseason number 2. And now they're like borderline top 10. And that happened quickly. So again, I don't think Alabama's horrible. I don't think they're going to fall off a cliff, but I think they're certainly behind Georgia and Texas right now, and to be just third in that conference, I don't think that's good enough for those fans.
I mean, time is the ultimate test. We'll see. I mean, generally, rule number 1 is never follow a legend.
Right.
When John Wooden retired at UCLA, they hired Gene Bartow. They fired him, and then they fired like 4 more guys after him, and none of them were even as successful as Gene Bartow. So
Yep.
That is a tough deal, no doubt. So tell me, how'd you like the first year of the 16-team SEC with no divisions?
I mean, I liked a lot of it. Certainly Texas and Oklahoma coming over was certainly interesting and brought new blood in and new games and things of that nature. But I was ultimately a little disappointed in just how ununiform the schedules were. I mean, you can't talk about Texas without talking about their schedule. And quite frankly, that's not fair to Texas, but it is what it is. You look at Oklahoma's schedule, it was a damn gauntlet. Meanwhile, Texas, their toughest game, they got blown out anyway, and it didn't even matter. You know what I mean? Because they really only had like one hard game in conference. So that, I think, is a major, major problem. And I don't know how they're going to fix that anytime soon. But obviously they're getting the same schedules again. Your fan base knows all too well. I mean, last year was the year to get Florida and Georgia. When I think of South Carolina football, I think of Florida and Georgia on the schedule? How in the hell neither one of them on the schedule? Not to mention Tennessee. You know, all these teams that I'm used to seeing South Carolina play, it's just kind of like they cobbled South Carolina. They're just like, we'll just give them the scraps or whatever. You know what I mean? So I think the scheduling, there's major issues. And it's become apparent. I don't think they're going to trash the title game, but the conference title game I'm talking about, but it's meaningless. It's completely meaningless. I was down there and there was no energy for it. There was no buzz. And it's a shame because that used to be a big time game. And I wish it was, you know, it should have been like Alabama, Ole Miss, or maybe South Carolina. Two of those three, put them in there. The winner of that game automatically gets into the college football playoff. That's what they're going to have to do with the championship game. It's going to have to be a playoff for the playoffs, if that makes sense, because no one cares about a conference championship in this new 12-team playoff era.
I mean, honestly, before this year, the SEC was really the only championship game that mattered. I mean, if you look, you know, at the secondary ticket market, I mean, you could walk into Charlotte with a $2 bill and get a ticket, you know. Pac-12, all the people that were at the gates, they probably left by halftime. You could go in the middle of the second quarter for free. You know, I hate to see the devaluing of the SEC championship game, but you're right. Maybe you put like 3 or 4 or 4 and 5 in that game to help boost their odds of getting into the college football playoff. I mean, honestly, I'm a proponent of the playoff. I think they got to do something about these automatic qualifying bids. I mean, the Big 12 and, you know, Boise State, they had no business getting buys in that thing. I mean, I think you had like Notre Dame was the 8th seed and Ohio State was the 9 seed in the championship game. I mean, that made no sense to me. Honestly, Arizona State didn't deserve a bye. You know, like I said,
No.
they played nobody.
And the team that got royally screwed was Oregon, who went undefeated through the whole thing. And what was their benefit? Well, no home game. You get Ohio State right out the gate, red hot. You know what I mean? Like,
Right.
Good luck.
That's right. No doubt. So, Texas. So I was never a Quinn Ewers fan. And so I thought he was really like the anchor around Steve Sarkisian's neck, because the only clutch play that dude ever made in his life was against Arizona State, which was a Big 12 team, because he is a Big 12 quarterback, not an SEC quarterback. I have no idea why he's going early to the NFL draft, but you know what? Sarkisian probably would never say it, but after that game, when he got back to his office and he closed his office door and pulled down the shades, he probably did a dance. I'm finally rid of this choker, Quinn Ewers. Now, Arch Manning, who I watched your show with your man from Athlon. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't say Arch Manning is the number one quarterback in the SEC. I know you and I are kind of on the same page on that. I personally think it's Nussmeier, Sellers, and Lagway from Florida. But, I mean, you kind of wonder about Manning, right? Like if Quinn Ewers really sucks and he can't run the ball and you got to get a first down, why don't you put Arch Manning in? I mean, I know he's got a lot of development to do and there's a long time until the season opener, but it seems like if he's really everything he's cracked up to be, he probably should have seen some time as a guy that could be a run pass option in the red zone.
Yeah. Yeah, that's going to be a $1 million question, particularly if Arch comes out here and looks like $1 million next year. Which I'm kind of with you. I'm not ready to just anoint him. I think he could be outstanding for all I know. But here's the good thing, Keith. We're going to find out right away. Texas opens at Ohio State. What an opener that'll be. The two teams that met in the semifinals. So I would have to think that all the motivation will be on Texas side after losing to Ohio State, and both those teams breaking in a lot of new players. So that's going to be a fun game to watch. But yeah, I mean, right now I'm not giving it to Arch being number one. I like the three you threw out: Nussmeier, Sellers, Lagway, and I kind of like Sellers and Lagway a little bit better just because they're better athletes. But certainly Garrett Nussmeier I think is the best. You want to say like field general and more experience and things of that nature. So, you're really splitting hairs there, but I think this is poised to be one hell of a year in the SEC for quarterbacks. I think it could be a lot better than it was last year. And I think the quarterbacks kind of held the league back a little bit last year. Now, certainly Sellers didn't and Lagway didn't. And once they emerged, you start to see those teams really emerge. But, I'm hopeful that there's 8 or 9, hopefully 10 really good quarterbacks in the conference next year.
So I don't understand this. Help me figure this out, because personally, I loved making that trip up to Norman, Oklahoma, one of the most historic programs in college football. I mean, they got the Heisman Alley with all the statues, the Heisman Trophy winner. They got all their All-Americans or national championships or bowl wins, everything. It has an SEC feel to it, no doubt about it. But I doubly liked it because I got into my seat, and then 5.5 minutes into the game, it was over. I mean, we just basically
21-0 at that point.
Yeah, 21-0. Burnt vegetables. I mean, they booed their first quarterback off the field, which really wasn't his fault, because his offensive line kind of looked like the Kansas City Chiefs offensive line in the Super Bowl. Then they brought in Jackson Arnold. He wasn't much better. He did not throw a pick six. He's leaving. They're bringing in some guy from the West Coast, which, as we know, those guys are softer than a marshmallow. And now everybody, even after for the second straight year, Oklahoma and Brent Venables, they lose 30 plus players to the transfer portal. Okay. He fired his offensive coordinator. His defensive coordinator left to go someplace else. He brought in Wes Goodwin, a.k.a. the Hobbit from Clemson, after Dabo fired him. And so he's running the defense. But why is everybody all of a sudden, when Oklahoma, until that Alabama game, they looked like they couldn't fight their way out of a wet paper sack? Why is everybody so high on Brent Venables in Oklahoma?
I must have missed it because I haven't seen much of that. I've seen more about how many games into it before he gets fired, because I think that's probably what is more likely to happen.
I mean, that's what I think.
If you look at the back half of their schedule, I don't have it in front of me right here, but you just bear with me one moment. They've got one heck of a conference slate, not to mention Michigan right out, second game. I don't think Michigan's that good, but just look at what they got to do in conference, Keith. They got their first conference game is Auburn, with Jackson Arnold coming back to Norman. You cannot lose that game, particularly after you beat them last year at Auburn. So
it's kind of a no-win scenario for them, because Auburn was actually sucked worse than they did last year.
Exactly. So I mean, that's a you better win that one, Venables. But then the rest of the conference slate. I mean, and these are all back to back to back. There's no cream puffs in between. Texas at South Carolina, Ole Miss, at Tennessee, at Alabama, Missouri, and then LSU. I don't think Oklahoma, if they can't beat Auburn, they're not going to be favored to win any of those. I mean, it's not out of the realm of possibility they go 1-7, 0-8 in the conference. So, yeah, I mean, I'm not projecting that, but that is somewhat realistic, I think.
I mean, no doubt. Look, let's face it, though. This time last year, we were all throwing dirt on Billy Napier's grave. We had already dug it, and we're putting him in the ground. And so you never know what's going to happen. But
yeah.
So
well, he did a good job throwing some of that dirt on his own grave. To be fair,
he certainly did. I mean, I'll still say when you got more polo shirts in your team picture than you do players, you better win big. And,
or at the very least, don't run 10 men on the field for every special teams play. How about that?
No doubt. All right, so I do want to get your thoughts on the 2024 Gamecocks and the emergence of Lenora Sellers. You know, Kyle Kennard ends up being the Bronco Nagurski winner. Nick Eamon-Warry's an All-American. Rocket Sanders, the National Comeback Player of the Year in college football. It all came together, but not after a 3-3 start that was marred by the LSU game. Sellers didn't play the second half. Certainly there were some questionable calls in that game. I mean, I think if the hindsight's always 2020, but if those refs had to do over again, I don't think they're throwing those flags late in that game.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, it's tough because it was a major step forward. I'm sure you remember. I'm sure your audience remembers. I mean, there was some talk, not a lot, but there was some talk that Beamer was on the hot seat going into the year, and he comes away in my thought, as SEC Coach of the Year. So he did a hell of a job. In all that you said there, you know, I thought the biggest storyline, and you kind of mentioned it, but I thought the biggest storyline was the defense and just how far they came along. Because speaking of a guy on a hot seat, Clayton White was, I think he was firmly on that hot seat because the defense had not been looking too good in 2023. So it did a hell of a job there. It helps, like you said, when you get Kyle Kennard and Dylan Stewart, and they look like damn demons off the edge that nobody could block. Maybe you would know better than I. I don't know if they knew quite what they were getting in Kyle Kennard. Quite frankly, I never really even watched him play till he played at South Carolina, and I was blown away by how good he was. So, defense. If it's gonna be tough to replace him, but I think Dylan Stewart. I did it early, like the top 25 players in the SEC. I put Dylan Stewart number one in the whole conference. So, wow. I think he's that good. And Rocket Sanders, losing him will be huge because I know the quarterback gets all the love always, and Sellers deserves all the love he got, particularly after that Clemson win, put the team on his back. But it seemed like the offense really, the spark was Rocket Sanders. So figuring out how to replace him will be huge. But certainly South Carolina's, I think they're well positioned to make the college football playoff next year.
Well, I mean, I thought, you know, quite frankly, they were probably more deserving than Indiana and Boise State and Arizona State. But that heartbreaking loss to LSU, and then South Carolina has the lead in Tuscaloosa in the fourth quarter, and Lenora Sellers just makes, an unforced fumble that gave Alabama a short field. You know, South Carolina didn't have a field goal kicker. Hell, they still don't have one. They should have gotten one out of the portal. They didn't. Right now, there's a walk-on from Hoover, Alabama, Peyton Argent, who's been down there for 2 years, and he is the only place kicker on the team right now. Oh. I'll get into that with my next guest, but
And I think what really hurt South Carolina last year, fair or not, which I didn't hold it against them, but it was, who were they really up against? I think they were up against Alabama and Ole Miss, and they lost to both of them. I think
Agreed.
Certainly that LSU, that was a screw job. I wouldn't even account of that as a loss. I know that's not the way they do it, but I would have said, well, they got screwed, and Sellers didn't play, so I count this as a 2-loss team. I think they should have been in. But from at least the committee standpoint, I understand the logic of, well, we're kind of debating Alabama, Ole Miss, and South Carolina. South Carolina played them both, lost to them both. I wouldn't have held them out, but I certainly understand the logic, I guess.
I think on the flip side of that, though, is Alabama was stinking it up down the stretch. South Carolina won 6 straight, including 4 of their last 5 wins were against top 25 opponents at the time they played. Ole Miss threw up that stinker in Gainesville against Sunbelt Billy. I mean, I still say, and look, Lane Kiffin, they took it to South Carolina. I don't know if at the time that was really considered, quote, a big SEC road game, but I still think the next big SEC road game Lane Kiffin wins will probably be the first big SEC road game Lane Kiffin's ever won.
Yep. If only they would have beaten Kentucky. Well, that was a home game even. That makes it even worse. I'm trying to think of a big road. I mean, he's beat Mississippi State on the road.
Yeah, and they lost to Kentucky, who South Carolina blew out in Lexington. So
yeah. They got no one to blame but themselves. That's for sure.
All right, so give me your early thoughts on the top contenders for the SEC championship game and the teams right now that you're looking at as we wrap up for the 2025-2026 college football playoff from the SEC.
Yeah. That's tough. Well, I think I'm always going to put Georgia in that conversation as long as Kirby's there. All that Carson Beck's stuff is pretty weird, but quite frankly, I didn't think he was.
Have you seen his girlfriend, though, bro? I mean,
we've all seen her. Thank you, Carson, for blasting that out.
I think we can understand if the money's the same. You
Right.
probably like to be, of course, that could have a negative impact on his play.
I think it did. And there was some behind the scenes. He was undefeated when his girlfriend was in basketball. So make that little note. When she had free time was when he was really struggling. But there was so many times. I mean, he's uberly talented. I don't like to talk down to the players, but he was way, way, way too inconsistent this year for the guy he was hyped up to be. So again, you'd like to have him, but I don't know how much of a true loss that is for Georgia. So I'm not knocking Georgia is my point for that. So I'm throwing Georgia in that conversation. Texas has still got the cream cupcake schedule. So I guess, they're a contender. I'm not penciling them in, but they're a contender. I think the other contenders will probably be LSU, Ole Miss, Alabama, and maybe South Carolina. That's probably those will be your contenders to make the playoff out of the SEC right now.
All right, so I got to ask you about your guy Josh Heupel and Nico Iamaleava. That Tennessee defense lost a lot. They're losing a lot of skilled players at Tennessee. How are you forecasting the Vols for this coming season?
I think they're probably like a 9-win team. 9-3 is probably what they can't beat Georgia. I know Georgia fans like to flex on that, but hell, hardly anybody can beat Georgia. But that game is at home, but I don't think it matters. I would heavily lean Georgia in that one. And then Tennessee's got to go at Alabama and at Florida two places they cannot win. So I think all those are likely losses, but I think Tennessee could beat everybody else on the schedule. But unless they pull an upset in one of those games, it's going to be tough. Rebuilding the offensive line, like you mentioned, some key defensive linemen off to the NFL. The receiving corps is rebuilt. Their outstanding running back, Sampson, off to the NFL. They're going to need Nico to take his game up to another level. And if he can do that, if he's the prince that was promised. I mean, he was only 19 last year. It's funny, Keith, how people I'm not saying he was great last year, but he wasn't awful either. They just like to write these people off because they're not 5-star, number one, first year starting. I think he's got a lot of development and growth to come. And if he can make those strides, he could, for all I know, he could be the best quarterback in the SEC next year. I don't think that's that big of a stretch. I'm not predicting that, but I'm saying I didn't think I'd be saying that about Lenore Sellers a year ago, that we'd be projecting him as maybe the best quarterback in the SEC. Yet here we are. So, yeah, I mean, Tennessee's got promise. And another thing they've got, I know I referenced Georgia, Alabama, and Florida, but the rest of the schedule, they're probably going to be favored in every single game. So, that doesn't mean a whole lot because they were favored to beat Arkansas and lost to them. So upsets happen, but eight or 9 wins, I think, for Tennessee next year.
Yeah, I think for me, Georgia, I can't really put it all on Carson Beck, although I never really thought he was great. I thought he was surrounded by great skill players, but I mean, when you go through 4 years of Brian McClendon recruiting wide receivers, who's probably the worst wide receivers coach in the history of the SEC and particularly South Carolina, plus you didn't have the stud tight end that was tearing it up for the Raiders. You really didn't have a great running back. I mean, everybody talked about this kid, ETN, that came from Florida. I mean, Rocket Sanders 2 or 3 times the back that guy is. I mean, Georgia I thought they were very mediocre around Carson Beck, and their offensive line wasn't very good, as we saw either.
There's a Georgia beat writer. I think his name's Coffee or Grape, something like that. I don't know. I don't really follow him or anything, but I did see many times he tried to argue me that Brian McClendon was the number 1 receiver coach in the country. And every time he said that, I thought of you, Keith, and I just started laughing.
Now, he was a great running back coach. I mean, he had like 3 or 4 5-star running backs when he was coaching running backs. But wide receiver, man, those guys, I mean, you ever seen that movie, The Replacements, where the dude, they have to put all the stickum on his hands. He finally catches the first pass.
Yep.
I don't even think his guys could catch a pass with all that stickum on their hands. They were just awful. So, hey, it's always good when we can rip the Bulldogs. I will say, man, my heart still goes out to Kirby Smart, that tragedy in New Orleans with his dad. I mean, I don't even know how he was able to coach that game right after that. That was certainly a tragedy. But, Mike, I can't thank you enough for coming on. Hopefully we can do this again maybe in the spring. It's always great catching up with you. And maybe we can talk some more junk about Brent Venables and Eli Drinkwitz in the spring. Be well, my friend, and thanks for being with us. And tell us what you've got coming up on the next episode of That SEC Podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Keith. It'll be cousin Shane and I. He's back from his vacation. I think he's 20 pounds heavier. But diet started January 1st. I think he blew that to smithereens. So I often don't even know what we're going to talk about, Keith, but it's a good time. We just hang out, drink some beers, and talk some ball. So come hang out with us over at That SEC Podcast. And, man, I appreciate you.
Appreciate you, my friend. Next time you come to Austin, last time that was a good time. Hopefully you let me know you're out here again. We'll hang out.
All right, buddy. Take care.
All right, you too. That was the unquestioned Dean of SEC Podcasting, Michael W. Bratton, the host of That SEC Podcast. Cousin Shane, great guest. I love it when he's on Feinbaum. Great stuff. Alex, that's a tough act to follow, but if anybody can do it, my Hampton County dude, I got faith that you can do it. How you doing, my friend?
I'm doing great. It's great to be back with you.
Man, it's great to have you on. Well, I can tell you one thing we're not going to talk about, and that's Gamecock men's basketball. So let's get that out of the way right now. We're full speed ahead. Michael Douglas, the iconic movie Wall Street, he's out at sunrise staring out at the Pacific, or I guess he's up in the Hamptons staring out at the ocean. And he's on the phone with Buddy Fox. And he says, money never sleeps. Well, recruiting never sleeps, Alex. And this is probably the earliest I've ever talked about recruiting for the following season. Usually I'm still talking about the guys that are coming in, but because basketball is so horrific and because South Carolina already has almost 20 official visits lined up, and a bunch of guys came on campus for junior days and will be back next month for spring practice. It looks like June 20th is really going to be the big weekend right now, at least according to On3. South Carolina's got 9 official visitors lined up for that weekend, and including the number 1 quarterback in the country, Jared Curtis, maybe the number 1 or number 2 interior lineman in the country, Darius Gray. He's the number 27 ranked player, Samari Matthews. Whoops, we lost Alex. All right, we'll get Alex back. While we do that, I do have a couple of women's basketball notes for you. Sunday, ESPN Game Day will be in Columbia for South Carolina's top 10 matchup against UConn. The 2-hour show will begin at 11 a.m. Eastern on ESPN and switch to ABC at noon, leading into that tip-off. To allow for fans to enter the arena in time for the show's open, you get to walk in at 10:30 a.m. with a fast break entrance opening at 10 for those who have purchased that add-on ticket. And so Alex is back. All right, I'm trying to add him to the stage. Add to the stage. There we go. We got a little, we're kind of like a network. We're on a time delay in case somebody says something they're not supposed to, they can beep it out. Alex, can you hear me? Alex? Can you hear me?
You got me?
I got you.
Can you hear me? Okay.
Yep. All right. So what do you think about all these January 20th guys? I mean, you got 4 top 75 players. One of them's committed to you. You got the number 1 quarterback in the country, maybe one of the top 2 or 3 corners, and Samari Matthews, who I think South Carolina's in good shape for, out of Huff High School and Huntersville up on the Lake Norman. You got Darius Gray, who I think South Carolina's been a long time lean to him from Richmond, Virginia. Alex, tell me what you think about how South Carolina recruiting is going to go. Kind of like, to me, like 2 years ago, South Carolina, beat the brakes off of Tennessee 63-38, and then beat Clemson in Death Valley to get to 8 wins. They didn't win the bowl game, just like this year. This year, though, they got to 9 wins. They got off to a fast start in recruiting, and it looks like we could see South Carolina once again make a push for a top 10 to 15 recruiting class in 2026. And we just lost Alex again. All right, one more note while we get him back. The FAM bus trips for the SEC tournament have been announced. FAMs can purchase daily trips Friday, March 7th, Saturday, March the 8th, or Sunday, March the 9th. It's $120 each, or you can get a weekend pass for $300. The price includes upper level general admission tickets to the SEC tournament, round trip transportation. You can go to ticketmaster.com/Gamecocks /WB25 SEC bus trips. Details regarding the travel and itinerary for each trip will be emailed to purchasers closer to the time of the trip after the SEC bracket and the game times have been finalized. Big week for Gamecock women's basketball. Again, they want to get rid of that bad taste of their mouths from that Texas loss. And then Sunday, you got UConn and Paige Beckers, AZ Fudd, Sarah Strong, the National Freshman of the Year leader. And quite frankly, she's been UConn's most impactful player. Her win share, if you're into analytics, has been more than Paige Beckers, which I don't know how that could be. Paige Beckers, I think, is awesome. I don't think she's as athletic as Caitlin Clark, but I think she is a better basketball player, if that makes sense. So there is that. I'm going to go ahead and run down some of these official visitors while we wait for Alex to join us. I know there's bad weather everywhere, and hopefully he's rebooting and getting ready to jump back in. I got through Jazavian Currents from Rock Hill South Point, who I think is an absolute beast. He could be an Isaiah Simmons type player. And you know what? South Carolina's got him and Kendall Daniels in back-to-back classes. Both of those guys could be like Nick Eamon-Warry, Isaiah Simmons type of guys. You got Genevieve Carr, 6'4", 325 from IMG. He's visiting the Gamecocks on June 20th. Peyton Dyer, who's committed, will get Alex take on him, 6'1", 190. He evidently had quite the performance at the Atlanta Under Armour camp. He appears destined for 4-star status. You got Tamarian Watkins, another 6'4" safety from Rock Hill, Northwestern High. Georgia's making a big push for him. I'm still wondering if he's related to Tony Watkins. You got Desmond Green and Trey Aiken, 2 offensive linemen from South Carolina. Those guys round out, at least for now, the June 20th visitors. And we welcome back in Alex, who hopefully just called the internet guy and gave him a piece of his mind. Alex, how we feeling? Good to go?
I think we're doing okay. Of course, as soon as I get ready to log in, the internet just starts to not cooperate. But knock on wood, I think we're okay for right now.
All right, so here's my question. So, you got right now at least 17 scheduled visits. I know there's some other guys, like I think there's a defensive tackle from Georgia that told Anna Adams, maybe, what's his name? Darius Simmons from Cairo, Georgia, that he's going to visit. It looks like it's going to be a banner year in North Carolina. Charlotte edge rusher Rodney Dunham, South Carolina's heavily in the mix for him. You got the twins in Weddington, Aiden and Andrew Harris. You got defensive tackle Noah Clark, defensive tackle Ben Bolware. Hopefully he's not into the after play extracurricular activities like the Clemson linebacker who kind of questionable at times. But big picture wise, South Carolina recruiting, they've already got a number of in-state guys lined up, a number of guys in the recruiting footprint, and they've already got several commitments for the class of 2026. So what's your overall impression of the early start for South Carolina's recruiting? And as we all know, in June, a lot of it, after June, it's just going to be a few guys, and then the rest is going to be transfer portal.
Yeah, it seems like they're off to a pretty good start here in this 2026 class. You see, obviously, some the commitments they got, but then they're in on a lot of high-level prospects in this 2026 class. And you mentioned South Carolina and North Carolina are both pretty good states this year in recruiting. And, I mean, they got some talented prospects in both states, and they're really kind of lining up some of those visits. Obviously, we'll start to see some of these spring visits start to get lined up for some spring practices. But, right before my internet went out, you were mentioning that June 20th official visit weekends really kind of lining up to be a big weekend for them. And obviously, they're filling out some of those other weekends, but it's going to continue to fill out. But, from what they have committed already, I saw Peyton this weekend at Carrollton High School. He looked really good and was the guy that was staying out to a lot of people. Obviously, with him, Georgia's going to be one to watch with him just because an in-state guy. They're always going to be one to watch with Georgia. But, I think they've off to a really good start here, and it seems like they are continuing to get these visits lined up.
I mean, no doubt. So is that that's got to be the big wide receiver, Ryan Mosley, right? Like that's going to be a South Carolina Georgia battle. I mean, some people put in a crystal ball pick for Georgia, and then he comes to South Carolina and he tells everybody it feels like home. 6'4", 205 from Carrollton, Georgia. I know he had to look good at that at Atlanta Under Armour camp, but sounds like Gamecock commitment and Duluth cornerback Peyton Dyer had a big showing as well at that camp.
Yeah, they both looked really good. I thought physically both were two guys that stood out. With Mosley, I think he's one too that, when you think about his recruitment, I think right now it kind of looks like South Carolina and Georgia for him. I think one, Texas A&M's also in there. Nebraska's also in there as schools that are staying out to him. But South Carolina's kind of put themselves right in a really good position for him, and he's going to be one that takes all of his official visits. I think he's got him getting them lined up, and I think he's going to be one to watch for sure. The wide receiver recruiting class is going to be really interesting to watch this year, just because of taking 6 guys in this last class. Like you'd have to think that Mike Furry is going to have his own kind of choice maybe of who he really wants to take because of just a number situation. You think of Mosley, who I thought looked really good, and it seems like South Carolina put themselves in a good spot. Gordon Sellers has already scheduled an official visit out of Charlotte, another one of these North Carolina prospects that looks really good too. So, and Travis Johnson as well from Virginia, he's scheduled to be in as well. So, Mike Furry's done a pretty incredible job so far since he's arrived, and I mean he's got them in on some high-level prospects already.
I mean, no doubt those seem to be the three guys. They're all bigger, 6'2", 6'3", 6'4", outside type guys. You got a number of guys that can be slot receivers, whether it's Mazeo Bennett, Lex Cyrus. I mean, even Jaden Sellers, you could probably play in the slot. Brian Rowe as well. I don't think they'll need to take 6 this year.
No, I don't think they'll need. I mean, if they take 6 again, that's going to be a pretty loaded wide receiver room. But I mean, like I said, Mike Furry. They did an incredible job this past cycle, and I mean, he kind of. I think he can be a little bit picky maybe with who he wants to take. Obviously, South Carolina's got to finish the job with some of the guys, but I mean, I think just because of the numbers standpoint, they could be a little picky as to how many they want to take and who they want to take.
All right, so let's talk quarterback recruiting. Jared Curtis committed to Georgia, decommitted. South Carolina, Ohio State, and Oregon look to be heavily involved. Now he's saying his top 3 schools are Georgia, South Carolina, and Oregon. He's from Nashville, Tennessee. He's 6'4", 225. I mean, if I'm South Carolina and I'm sitting there and I got Lenora Sellers, I mean, look, we all hope South Carolina goes 10-2 or 11-1, plays in the SEC championship game, goes to college football playoff, and Lenora Sellers is sitting there, and Chris Fowler's talking to him, and Mike Shula and Shane Beamer about why he should win the Heisman, and then he goes off to the NFL. But he may need one more year. Then you got a former 5-star guy in Prentice Air Noland who's sitting there who looks like a young Michael Penix Jr. Minus the 20 injuries Michael Penix Jr. had in college. And you got Cutter Woods, who I like a lot. And, the cupboard is not bare there. I say all that to say this. When it comes nut cutting time, I mean, I got to think that NIL figure for the number 1 quarterback in the country is going to be awfully high. I mean, awfully high. I mean, is South Carolina going to pay? I mean, hell, I don't know. Jalen Rashada, he don't even need to play college football. He's probably got $20 million in the bank. We all know this cat from Michigan got $12 million to decommit from LSU and go to Michigan. Nico Iamaleava, he got like $9 million to go to Tennessee. If you're South Carolina and you got all these guys, and maybe you do have Lenora Sellers for another year, to me, I'm not paying that much for a quarterback. I'd rather get more defensive linemen or linebackers or corners or game-changing players at other positions, because to me that just makes sense. I mean, I know it's nice to be in the top 3 for the top quarterback in the country, and Brady Smigel from California, who Mike Shula and Darren Usher have got you involved with. But I mean, for me, if you're committed to dual threat quarterbacks, right, and you've got Lenora Sellers, and then you're probably going to have Air Noland after him, wouldn't it make more sense to try to put the heat back on Landon Duckworth and get another big-time dual-threat quarterback in your class that probably isn't going to cost you $7 to $12 million?
Yeah, I mean, when you look at Landon Duckworth, I mean, obviously when he was committed early on, but I think maybe people thought that once he decommitted, South Carolina was going to be out of it, but I don't think that's the case at all. Like talking to him this weekend at the Under Armour camp, like it sounds like there's high mutual interest. Like both sides are still interested, and he's got obviously everybody coming after him as well. Like I think one to him, Georgia could be one to watch with him too, kind of depending on where Jared Curtis goes. If Curtis goes back to Georgia, or if he doesn't, or if Jared Curtis ends up going elsewhere, does Georgia get back involved or get involved with Duckworth? And he's I really like Duckworth. I kind of liked him before, but then saw him at camp. Like he's physically impressive and he can really put the ball in. I think he kind of fits what South kind of has in that room right now, to be honest. Kind of like what you were mentioning. I think he kind of fits the mold for that, the Loras dual threat, the Loras Sellers type, and the same thing with Aaron Nolan. So I really like Duckworth, but they're in on these three quarterbacks, which for one is impressive that they're in on top, three of the top quarterbacks in the country. But honestly, I think Duckworth is really, really good, and if they found a way to get him back in the fold, that'd be another great pickup.
No doubt. So at running back, South Carolina will lose half of their scholarship running backs after this season. Rasul Faison, the transfer from Utah State, and Oscar Attaway the third. I did see this morning where my man Jalen McGill, who had committed to Rutgers over the weekend, he decommitted from Rutgers. South Carolina appears to really be in it for Carson Baker, who just so happens to attend Langston Hughes High School in Fairburn, Georgia, the same high school as Prentice Air Noland. Beyond those two, and I know it's early, how is the running back room or running back recruiting going for the Gamecocks?
Yeah, so it kind of feels like Carson Baker may be one of the top guys for them in that room right now, and I think they're after him hard and kind of made him a priority. And I think with him I feel like I keep mentioning this school, but Georgia's one to watch with him, just being out of Georgia, and he also got Ohio State in there, who seems to have really caught his interest as well. And I think Texas A&M too is another one to watch with him. But South Carolina's kind of right in the thick of it there right now, but there's a lot of competition. Obviously, you mentioned Jalen McGill just decommitted this morning. He committed to Rutgers over that kind of that same Saturday as the South Carolina's junior day, I think, and obviously decommitted this morning. So we'll see. I mean, South Carolina's offered, Clemson's offered as well. So we'll see how much South Carolina gets involved there. And another one to kind of keep an eye on maybe is Jerrion Campbell out of Georgia. He was at the camp this weekend and kind of mentioned that there is some interest from both sides there for South Carolina. And we'll see kind of if he gets in for a spring practice and see if an official visit kind of gets scheduled. I think it may all depend on kind of how the running back room, the guys I mentioned previously, how they kind of fill out for South Carolina.
All right, so it seems like there's at least three offensive linemen in the state that are garnering big-time interest. You got Desmond Green, who's almost 6'5", 350 pounds, out of Timberland High School there in St. Stephen's, Berkeley County, my old stomping grounds around Goose Creek. You got Trey Aiken at Clinton, and then you got Zion Gillis from Carver's Bay in Hemingway, who is probably like the only tackle of the three, about 6'5", 290. How do the Gamecocks stand with these three guys? Seems like Georgia's really made a push with Desmond Green as of late.
Yeah, that's what I was going to mention right off the bat, was Georgia's one to watch with Desmond Green as well. And I think maybe it kind of looks like it could be South Carolina, Georgia right now for Desmond Green, but as you mentioned, Georgia's made a pretty big push for him. And, Zion Giles is another guy who I think has South Carolina's put themselves in a good position for. They've really worked that recruitment hard, and he's another one he's in-state lineman that's high-profile recruits, got a lot of different offers. I think Alabama's offered. He's got a lot of high-profile offers, but he's set to be in for that June 6th weekend, and I think it's South Carolina's put themselves in a good spot. And Trey Aiken as well. He's another one South Carolina's had their eye on for a while. I remember seeing him at camp and over the summer, and he looked really good there. And I think a few schools to watch with him are NC State, Florida. I think is up there too, and we'll see kind of what Clemson ends up doing with him. But South Carolina's involved in all three, and we'll kind of see how the visits kind of check out for those guys.
Good stuff. All right, so defensive line is always going to be important. South Carolina, I still think they're probably a little light there, but there was some news last week and into this week. I believe it was Steve Wiltfong. The Oracle says that St. Francis Academy, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's the same high school that produced Dylan Stewart. Zion Ely, who some people have as the number one player in the country as an edge. He's not as big as Dylan Stewart, 6'3", 225. He has been committed to Maryland, but like a lot of guys that commit early to Maryland, they generally don't end up there. What kind of a shot do the Gamecocks have? Because the who's who of college football are coming in for him. How big of a draw is playing opposite Dylan Stewart, at least for a year, and being developed by a guy like Sterling Lucas, no pun intended, who has a sterling reputation at developing edge rushers? We're talking to Michael W. Bratton before you came on. He didn't even know who Kyle Kennard was until this year, right? And then all of a sudden he leads the SEC in sacks. He's first team All-SEC. He's All-American and wins the Bronco Nagurski Award as the top defensive player in the country. How much do you think all of that factors in with Zion Ely?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of interesting, not to get off, but I was talking to KJ Green, who's a 2027 edge and one of the top edges, and he kind of mentioned what South Carolina did this past season on the defensive line is something that stands out to him. So I think that's something that will resonate with a lot of recruits, and with Zion specifically. I think there's obviously been talk of him officially visiting, and I think we'll see what the interest is there once the visit happens. But Sterling Lucas was up there to visit him a few weeks ago during the period. And, I think you see if he gets down for a spring practice for one, but, if he ends up scheduling an official visit, then there's obviously some interest there. But, he's got everybody after him. He's really, really good. And, I think obviously they'll have a little bit of help with Dylan Stewart being up from that area and what he was able to do as a freshman. You have to think that's attractive. But, we'll kind of see where the interest is there once the official visit happens as well.
No doubt. It looks like it's D-line heaven is back. You look at Rodney Dunham, right out of Charlotte. You got the Aiden and Andrew Harris, the twins from Weddington. You got those guys. There are other guys in North Carolina that South Carolina's involved with. You look at defensive tackle Noah Clark and Ben Boulware jump off the page. This is a big year in the state of North Carolina. Elijah Littlejohn from West Mecklenburg in Charlotte. He's kind of an undersized guy. Maybe he's a linebacker. Not so much. I'm just looking here. You got Keyshawn Eliezer from Raleigh, who they list at 6'5", 190. He's going to grow into his body. And I'm just going to call him Ebenezer from South Garner because I'm not going to slaughter his last name. He's 6'4", 220. And then in Irmo, Jamil Walker, the former strength coach at Arkansas that Shane Beamer tried to hire before he hired Luke Day. Then for some reason, Sam Pittman gets rid of him. He comes to South Carolina. He was really big in helping Rocket Sanders get back. His son, Julian Walker, I think maybe the most underrated prospect on the East Coast and in the South. 6'6", 230. I mean, you saw him down at the bowl game or at bowl practices with the players walking around. I mean, this cat looks like he's already a sophomore or junior in college. What's the ceiling like for Julian Walker? I mean, he looks like he could be one of the first dudes off the bus, and he's just going to be a senior in high school this year.
Yeah, I mean, he looks like, as you mentioned, he could be ready to go right now. Now, I remember first kind of seeing him over the summer at these camps, and he would do some workouts, and was kind of like, who's that guy? And, he was always around. You saw him when we go to practices, South Carolina's practices, he's around the team and everything. And, South Carolina's offered it. I actually don't think he's ranked right now on 24/7 Sports, but I fully expect that guy's going to rise in rankings once his name and his film gets out there, because he's really, really good. And just physically, he looks like he can play right now, but his play also looks like he can go. And obviously, he's starting to land some offers now that his name's getting out there, but he's really flown under the radar. And, maybe for South Carolina, that's a good thing, kind of having him in the backyard. If he stays under the radar, South Carolina knows who he is. And, obviously having his dad on the staff is obviously going to be a big factor in that. But he's one who, we talk about Rodney Dunham as one of the best edges, one of the top edges on the board right now for South Carolina, and rightfully so. He's really good, and South Carolina's put themselves in a good spot for him. But, I mean, they can have another really good edge class, so they can find a way to close on some of those guys, with Julian Walker included.
I mean, no doubt about it. Secondary guys generally emerge after camps and all that, but I mean, the safety group in the state of South Carolina, I mean, you've already got Jazavian Currents. He's committed at South Carolina. You got Tamarian Watkins. You got to help me out with the kid over at Dorman, who's a big-time player as well. I mean, it just looks like
Polo Anderson.
Yeah, Anderson. I mean, it just looks like another Jazavian Currents is one of the top players in the country, and Tamarian Watkins, I'm still trying. Does anybody know, is he related to Tony Watkins? Because it seems like he's a big, hard-hitting safety with the last name of Watkins. He's got to be related to Tony Watkins. That dude was the body bag before Shannon Wadley became the body bag.
Yeah, I haven't heard if there's any relation there, but I mean, he plays. I mean, he's another one of these really good Rock Hill corner or Rock Hill defensive backs. I mean, Jazavian Currents is there, and we know how good he is, and he in some of these all-star games he participated and shined, and he could be a guy who continues to rise the rankings. And it was good for South Carolina to be able to go ahead and get him in the class, because he's got every offer he could want in the country. And Tamarian Watkins is a guy who's kind of starting with his junior year, kind of risen the ranks a little bit and really gotten his name out there, and he's getting offers from Georgia's after him pretty well. Texas A&M's offered him. I mean, the offers just keep coming in for Tamarian Watkins, and rightfully so. He's really good, and South Carolina's put themselves in a good spot for him as well. And with Contavian Anderson out of Dorman, I think it's going to be a South Carolina Clemson battle, and I think it's going to be one where we'll see. We'll see how long before he makes a commitment. But Clemson is definitely one to watch in his recruitment, and South Carolina was in really early with him before Clemson, so. I think we'll have to see if that's a big factor for him. But, Clemson's definitely one to watch. But from a safety standpoint, if South Carolina can find a way to land one of those two of Watkins and Anderson, you're still looking good with who you brought in this last class and who you already have on the roster. But, I mean, safety looks like you could be in a very good spot here in the future.
No doubt. I mean, you already got Peyton Dyer committed. It's, you got to hold on to him. But you've also got Corey Adams, one of the top corners in the country from the DMV. He's coming in for an official visit, 6'2", 175. You got Samari Matthews, who's probably been to South Carolina more than he's been to any other place. And I know he's listed as an athlete on 24/7 Sports, but I think everybody, I know Torian Gray loves him as a corner. And honestly, if you think about Torian Gray, he loves guys that can play wide receiver. I mean, you look at Bakari Swain, what he did at wide receiver You look at Jalen Kilgore, what he did at wide receiver in high school, and Jalewis Solomon was prolific. All those guys are in the secondary at South Carolina. I mean, how would you handicap it for Samari Matthews right now?
Yeah, I think I really like where South Carolina stands with Samari Matthews. I mean, he got us up at Huff in Charlotte, so not too far away from South Carolina. And as you mentioned, I think he's been to I'm not even sure how many times that he's been to South Carolina, but it's a lot. Like, it seems like he's at South Carolina a lot. And, I think he's pretty close with some of the in-state guys at South Carolina, some of those other defensive backs. And I think they're recruiting him really hard. And, he's got obviously on the books for an official visit. And, another one that he's got, some other suitors who are coming after him hard. But South Carolina, I really like where they stand with him. I think they put them in a good spot. And, Torian Gray identified him pretty early on, and they've been after him hard ever since. I think that's, starting to pay off, and we'll see if that ultimately they can close on them.
I mean, coming off a 9-win season where you won your last 6 games and, we're being talked about for the college football playoff, I think this summer and spring could be very productive for South Carolina. We saw how productive it was 2 years ago when, you were landing Michael Smith and Pringle and Josiah Thompson and my man number 10, who's going to be an edge guy that they signed out of Powder
Wendell
Spring.
Gregory.
Yeah, Wendell Gregory and guys like that. I mean, they've already got 4 commitments, and you got these in-state guys and some other guys that they've been in great shape for. I mean, it's looking good. I mean, so let's talk about what South Carolina does not have, and that is a place kicker. Okay, I still say if you would have had a healthy Mitch Jeter last year, South Carolina, in spite of the screw job by the officials and the fumble in Tuscaloosa by Lenora Sellers, you're probably in the college football playoff because Mitch Jeter's making those kicks. They got Max Kelly. He's coming in. He's never kicked in a college game. Okay, you got Peyton Argent from Hoover, who's been down there for 2 years. He's never kicked in a college game. If you're Shane Beamer in South Carolina, I mean, look, I know they still probably feel like they could maybe use an experienced outside receiver and probably another defensive tackle if you can find one. But to me, I'm loading up my NIL money for an experienced, tried, veteran place kicker because the margin of victory between winning and losing is so thin every week in the Southeastern Conference. Don't they have to try to get a field goal kicker in this spring portal period? Whether they have to, well, I don't even know if tampering is a thing. I guess for Taylor Edwards it was, but it seems like it's open season. I'm putting all my money in trying to get a field goal kicker because when you boil it right down to it, if you have a better field goal kicker, you probably win the bowl game and you probably take that LSU game to overtime and maybe you win in Tuscaloosa as well.
Yeah, when the transfer portal first opened this past cycle, I was really interested to see what South Carolina did at place kicker if they went after anybody. And ultimately, I'm not sure 100% if they were, really looking to go after anybody, but obviously didn't land anybody. And, I think maybe it's one where they, see what they have, what it looks like in the spring. And if that spring portal window opens back up, like obviously it wouldn't be surprised if somebody hopped in there and they got in on somebody, because I think we've seen in the past just how valuable, around the country this year and then in the past at South Carolina, just how valuable a really good kicker is. You had Parker White, Elliott Fry, Ryan Suckup, you keep on going with names of guys who are really, really good at South Carolina. And so I wouldn't be one bit surprised when that spring portal opens back up, if there's somebody out there that they think is a fit and they really like that they go after. I just think, just for one, if they think it's a guy who can come in and be the number one kicker, but two, just another body in there as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think Virginia Tech's got a guy from South Carolina who's a kicker. I'd probably be back channeling with him because I think that dude hit a 56-yard field goal for the Hokies this year. I don't know what it's going to be, but to me, you can't go into the second consecutive season with Lenora Sellers, who's now a known commodity, all these wide receivers. I mean, hey, we didn't even talk about the fact that Nick Harbor's going to go through spring practice, right? Like, to me, that's a huge deal that he's going to focus on football from spring practice all the way through the season. Defensive tackle. I mean, you hope Gabriel Brownlow, Dendy, and Xavier Hardy can be the guys. I mean, J.R. Johnson and Justin Okoronkwo at linebacker. I think the secondary is going to be in great shape. I mean, certainly to me, I think every corner on your roster can all tackle better than O'Donnell Fortune, who, by the way, was MVP of his bowl game because he had a pick six. I mean, South Carolina is really not talent deficient at any position other than place kicker. And I just don't see how you can afford to go into the second straight year with a field goal kicker that's never attempted a field goal when you got to go to LSU, you got to go to Missouri, you got all these tough SEC road games. At Texas A&M is another one with a guy that's never made a pressure kick on the road in the SEC to potentially win a game or send it into overtime.
Yeah, absolutely. That's why I say I think it's just kind of an evaluation this spring of what they think can happen or who could be that number one kicker. But I wouldn't be surprised if somebody hops in their portal and they go after him just because, as you mentioned, kicker, one thing, you have so many big kicks and so many big situations that it can be tough to rely on a freshman to do that because not a lot of freshmen are ready to come in and do that. And maybe Max Kelly is, and maybe he shows that he is. But, I think it's just one of those where you more than likely you'd like to have a veteran in those situations just because of those big moments. It can be a lot for a freshman. But we'll see if Max Kelly's ready for that. And if they think they need to go out and find somebody, we'll see if they do that.
I mean, look, Alex Herrera was, I think, a sixth-year player, and some of the moments were too big for him simply because he had just never done it before. He had never been on the road and had to hit a 45-yard field goal. I mean, hey, he did make that big one in the fourth quarter at Clemson, though. That was certainly wound up being the difference in the game. But earlier in the season, just like it took Lenora Sellers time to really for the game to slow down and for the offensive line to come together and the wide receiving core to come together, 6 games in to an SEC season, if you're missing kicks in close games, your season, the die may already be cast. So I don't know what they're going to do, but to me, I have more questions about that than I do any other position on this team. I mean, certainly Mason Love is going to have big shoes to fill, literally and physically. Kai Kroger was like 6'4", 215 pounds. He's going to probably kick for a long time in the NFL. But at least he was the number 1 rated punter by Cole's kicking service as a senior in high school. And it appears that they're really happy with him. And I mean, hell, he may have to be the kickoff guy as well. I think like 97% of his kickoffs were for touchbacks as a senior in high school. But they just don't have anybody that's done it as a field goal kicker. And again, that could be the difference between 9-3 and 11-1.
Yeah, I mean the margins are slim in the SEC, and I think kind of with going to what you said about Mason Love, like I think he had it was good for him to have this freshman year where he was behind Kai Kroger to learn learn under a guy who's been one of the best punters South Carolina's had, and I think he's one where Joe DeCamillis, we kind of talked to him at the bowl game and they mentioned how impressed they are with Mason Love and the work he's done, and I think he is ready to kind of step into those shoes, and you could watch him in warm-ups before a game and he'd be booming punts, and he looked like he's ready to go. But as we've been talking about, kicker is one of the questions here. Field goal, place kicker, one of the questions here for this team once we get into spring practice. And there's a few questions with different positions, but I think that is one that's maybe kind of underlying or maybe under the radar again this season.
No doubt, Alex. I can't thank you enough. Can we get you back in a couple weeks to maybe preview some position battles for spring practice? I'd love to do that with you. I had that down, but I can save that page for another time. We really took a deep dive into recruiting. I hope everybody enjoyed that. I know we always enjoy having you on the show, and so be well, my friend, and hopefully we can get you back in a couple weeks and we can kind of really preview what I think is going to be several key position battles as we head into spring football practice.
Yeah, absolutely. Always love being on, and always down to come on and join you. So looking forward to the next time I come on here with you.
All right, Alex, have a fantastic rest of your week. Thanks for being with us, and we'll look forward to catching up with you down the road.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. See you next time.
All right, that was Alex Jones from the Big Spur. What a great show with Alex and Michael W. Bratton, the host of that SEC podcast. So that'll do it for me today. We'll be back next week, same bat time, same bat channel. I'll be back tomorrow on Gamecock Pod Daily. We're currently in the midst of a bunch of Five Guys segments, talking about, we talked about 5 offensive transfer portal impact guys, 5 defensive transfer portal guys. We talked about red shirt or seniors for defense and offense. We're going to go through every class and every position. And I think tomorrow we're going to talk about offensive line, and we're going to talk about the big tree conundrum, because my good friend Tony Morrell, one of his most trusted sources, says they think by the time spring practice is over, Tree Babalade will be the most talented offensive lineman on the roster. And if that's the case, I don't think you're going to have your best 2 players at the same position. They got to figure it out. And if he is as good as Josiah Thompson, then Cason Henry needs to be in a position battle at right tackle. That's just my thoughts on that. We'll bring Alex back. We'll have a great guest for you next week. We'll probably talk about women's basketball in that big UConn game. Hopefully, Paige Beckers becomes the first UConn player in history to lose 5 times to South Carolina. That should be a wild, wacky atmosphere Sunday afternoon at Colonial Life Arena with College Game Day there for 2 hours prior to tip-off. 18,000 fans, another top 10 matchup. So I'm looking forward to that. I'm looking forward to being back with all of you next week. Until then, God bless. Go Gamecocks. Be safe. Have a great week. And we'll be back next Wednesday. Same bat time, same bat channel. Until then, I'm out of here.